I want to talk a little bit about frequencies. Now, since we're using wireless transmissions or radio frequency transmissions, we're really talking about sending signals through the air using particular frequencies. And those frequencies are how we actually carry the data across. So we've got a particular frequency that ends up being the carrier for the signal that we are trying to send, which is the data that we're trying to communicate between two systems or between a system and an access point. Now, the frequencies that are in use for 802.11 are part of the industrial, scientific, and medical radio bands. And commonly, you'll see we're using data in the 2.4 gigahertz, 2.6 gigahertz range. And that's where you will commonly see Wi Fi signals originating from, is that 2.4 gigahertz range. You'll also see signals in the 5 gigahertz range. Now, it used to be that there was a particular subset of the 802.11 protocols. It was 802.11a. And now we're seeing additional Wi Fi or 802.11 protocols that are making use of the 5 gigahertz frequency range. You will see an awful lot of signals in that 2.4 gigahertz range. What we're talking about, though, is a case where that 2.4 gigahertz range is really becoming cluttered. One of the issues that you'll see sometimes is if you've got, say, a cordless phone that's acting up that's really old, or a microwave oven that's really old. You've got some of these older electronics that are operating somewhere near that same frequency range that your 802.11 Wi-Fi systems are using. You may start to see spikes into that same frequency range that 802.11 is using, and you could end up seeing degraded signals as a result. So there are a lot of consumer electronics that are operating in that 2.4 gigahertz range. Now, there are 14 channels, as you can see here, that are defined in the 2.4 gigahertz band that comes out of the industrial, scientific, and medical band. And you can see here we've got 14 channels where we've got lower frequencies and upper frequencies. And you can figure here that we've got a 22 megahertz range here in channel number one, actually in all of the channels. You'll see that same frequency spectrum there. And we've also got the 5 gigahertz Wi Fi channels and frequencies as well. And you'll see we've got different channel numbers here and also the frequencies and where they are actually in use. And right here, we've got 4 of these channels that are in use in North America, according to the FCC, on the low end. And then we've also got an additional 5 on the upper end. So there are a couple of different frequency ranges, and as I said, you can see cases where different consumer electronics will be making use of some of those frequency ranges or somewhere near those same frequency ranges. So if you've got a cordless phone or a microwave oven, those are really common ones, as well as maybe other devices that are operating somewhere near that same frequency. You could end up seeing spikes into the same range where you're trying to operate your Wi-Fi network, and you could see degraded performance. Of course, the other thing that you've got to take into consideration with the frequencies is where you've got a case of lots of people using that same 2.4 gigahertz range at the same time. So as an example, if I just scan here locally, it won't take very long before you'll start to see a lot of different networks. Most of these are on that same 2.4 gigahertz range. And as I said, if we just kind of let this sit and run, you'll start to see a lot more. The more networks I've got here, the more contention there is for that frequency space, and the more potential collisions you've got in the air for the signals that you're trying to transmit, meaning you'll be clobbering your neighbor trying to get data just across your local network. So we've got cases where in really tightly populated areas where there are a lot of people nearby, you will end up getting a lot of people trying to use that same limited space, which is one of the reasons, of course, that we're starting to expand into the 5 gigahertz range We've got wider bandwidth available there, and it also starts to pull some of the people out of the 2.4 gigahertz range. And again, you can see we're just accumulating a lot of Wi-Fi networks that are close by me. Most of those are using that 2.4 gigahertz range. So that's a lot of people trying to use really a pretty small set of frequencies. So when you're deploying wireless networks or you're thinking about wireless networks, thinking about the frequencies that are in use and the channels that are making use of those different frequencies, that's something to definitely keep in mind, particularly if you've got a choice between 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz. And if you are in an area that is really kind of heavily populated, like you're in a downtown area with a lot of businesses around, and you're trying to think about how you're going to deploy your own wireless network for your business, as an example, or if you live in an apartment building and you've got a lot of neighbors around, you want to maybe think about looking at the 5 gigahertz wireless networks, assuming that your systems can support those frequency ranges, and making sure you're looking at devices that will support the 5 gigahertz frequency spectrum.